playwright Tom Stoppard once said, "There are never too many English gulls. Among them all, the Russian gull will always be recognizable." Except that's not what he said. That's what you get if you put his words into Google Translate, send them through Russian, Japanese, and Norwegian, and then back into English. I'll tell you what he actually said later in the video. Anyway, willkommen, bienvenue, and welcome to a genteel black hole, the home of my bookish rambles. Je m'appelle Ali. Pardon my French. The other day, I saw a really interesting video by Mark from book-ramble, where he showed 3 wildly different translations of ostensibly the same poem. I'll put a link in the description if you'd like to see that. Recently, I've been thinking a lot about translation as well, and Mark's video inspired me to try and put these thoughts into some kind of order. I don't have a particular conclusion, but I thought it'd be an interesting talking point, so I'd really welcome your input in the comments. I believe that reading, or engaging with any work of art, is a collaborative act. The artist presents their work, and you interpret it based on your own perspective, your life experience, your opinions and biases. The final part of the creative act is not when the artist stops working, but when you observe their work. You can never stand in the same river twice, and you can never read the same book twice. Each time you read it, you are a different person. The Hobbit is not the same book to me now as it was when I first read it 30 years ago. Existential crisis incoming? But some works have mediators, another collaborator between you and the author. Sometimes that's an editor who writes explanatory footnotes. Sometimes it's a theatre company, a cast and director presenting their interpretation of a classic play. And sometimes it's a translator. The fact is, I can't actually read, say, Anna Karenina without learning Russian, something that I have neither the time nor the inclination to do. The translator then attempts to present their interpretation of the original work in a new language. But it's impossible to translate something word for word and completely retain its original meaning, if any work can be said to even have an inherent exact meaning. Every translated work poses many challenges for a translator. Last month, I read 3 different translated works from 3 different languages, and each one made me keenly aware of that struggle. One book I read was Inspector Imanishi Investigates by Seicho Matsumoto, originally written in Japanese. Part of this murder mystery plot revolves around Japanese regional accents. The translator, Beth Carey, does a good job of getting that information across, but I can't understand it on an instinctive level the way a Japanese reader might. I found it fascinating, but my perspective is unavoidably that of an outsider. I can't have that same eureka moment of understanding that I might if, for example, it was an English mystery where someone is presumed to be from Newcastle because of their accent, and it turns out they're actually from Sunderland. And if you're watching this from outside the UK, now you know how I felt. Another of the books I read was The Seagull by Anton Chekhov, originally written in Russian. Unlike the Matsumoto book, which has only been translated into English once, there are multiple translations of The Seagull to choose from. One such translation was by Tom Stoppard, and here, finally, is what he had to say about it. You can't have too many English seagulls. At the intersection of them all, the Russian one will be forever elusive. And The Seagull really is an elusive, ambiguous play, perhaps made even more so by the act of translation. Even the title is controversial. The play does feature a bird, but It's not actually a seagull. It's set by a lake, not the sea. A more accurate title for the play might be simply The Gull, but in English that comes with its own connotations, suggesting a play about someone who is gulled, tricked, which would, ironically, be misleading. The word gull is also just not as easy on the ear as seagull, so most translators stick to the more poetic, slightly less accurate title. Cultural differences also pose a challenge for both translator and reader. I know even less about Russia than I do about Japan. Each character in The Seagull is referred to by a range of different names, each iteration denoting a different level of respect or familiarity. The translation I read by Peter Carsten retained the whole spectrum of names. My initial confusion is, basically a skill issue, but I'm starting to get the hang of it now, so I hope my next experience of Russian literature will be slightly less daunting. But again, it wasn't something that I could get on an instinctive level, the way a Russian reader would. The experience can't be translated, even if the words are. Other things are hard to translate simply because the second language doesn't have that feature. Most recently, I read The Wild Duck by Henrik Ibsen, originally written in Norwegian. In this case, the book includes footnotes from the translators, Deborah Dawkin and Eric Skugovic, and they make abundantly clear the challenges that they faced. There are several points where the footnotes admit that the subtlety of Ibsen's original is lost. Modern English no longer has distinct formal and informal modes of address. We used to use you formally and thee informally. The switch from one to the other is vital to understanding the nuance in Shakespeare's work, for example. The same thing happens in Ibsen's work, but it just can't be translated into modern English. The translators approximated it by having Gina use Mr. Verla's first name, accidentally revealing the true closeness of their relationship, before carefully switching back to the more formal Mr. Verla. But the effect isn't quite the same, isn't quite as finessed as Ibsen's original, or Shakespeare's shifting you and thee. Or so I gather from the footnotes, because, like the other languages I mentioned, I also don't speak Norwegian. But yeah, these are kind of unfinished thoughts. The ideas are circling my head like a seagull, and like the Chekhov play, I find it fascinating, but I couldn't tell you what the ultimate point is. One thing, though, I do feel that translators should be credited more prominently. You are, after all, reading their words on the page. I've read a number of sci-fi books by the Polish author Stanisław Lem, and the ones translated by Michael Kandel were by far the most readable. So, was I enjoying Lem or Kandel's translations of Lem? I'm not sure. Anyway, that's about as much sense as my brain can make of all this today. If you have any thoughts, then please let me know in the comments. I'm always happy to hear from thee. But that's about it from me today. I hope you're having a lovely day, and I will see you when I see you.